In the sterile, white confines of the Penumbra black site, Dr. Aris Thorne cataloged the mundane effects of the forgotten. Tasked with processing inmate property, he discovered an object that defied physics, a small, non-Euclidean artifact that absorbed all light. Later, under the simulated night of the prison, Aris secretly subjected the artifact to analysis. His advanced diagnostic tools, paragons of logic and precision, returned only errors and paradoxical data. The object possessed no measurable mass, yet warped the light around it, and its surface geometry was a physical impossibility. Aris watched, mesmerized, as the very fabric of space seemed to fold in on itself at the artifact's edges. He named it the zero-point key, a label for an enigma that mocked his understanding of the universe. His frustration grew into a cold, intellectual obsession. The key was a problem that demanded a solution. While rotating the key under a microscanner, his grip slipped. As he caught it, his knuckles brushed against his workbench, and for a fraction of a second his hand phased partially through the solid plasteel. A wave of vertigo and nausea washed over him. Shock gave way to awe as he carefully replicated the effect, realizing with a jolt of terror and triumph that the key allowed him to pass through solid matter. This was not a puzzle, it was a tool. Driven by this discovery, Aris accessed the prison archives, searching for the artifact's origin. The key was confiscated from a single source, Inmate 0. The file was heavily redacted, black bars obscuring nearly all data, but a single line in the summary remained. Inmate held for charges of reality-tampering and classified as an existential threat. Aris scoffed at the language. It was the kind of dramatic hyperbole corporations use to justify their most secure prisons and most forgotten inmates. Inside the sterile confines of his locked cell, Aris conducted the first intentional test. He held the zero-point key, its impossible coolness, a stark contrast to the tremor in his hand, and focused his mind on the corridor beyond the solid door. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the world seemed to twist inward upon the artifact. He took a step, and reality gave way. The sensation was a nauseating plunge through cold static. He emerged in the empty, silent corridor, the triumph of the act immediately soured by a wave of vertigo and a profound, hollow sense of loss, like a crucial memory had been scooped from his mind. Before the patrol cycle could reveal his absence, Aris slipped back through the door, the return journey just as disorienting. His first logical imperative was to erase the evidence. Accessing his workstation, he brought up the prison records, intending to delete the digital log of his cell door being opened without authorization. But his attention was caught by an anomaly. He searched for the file on Inmate 0, the key's previous owner, and found nothing. It was not merely redacted or access denied. The file, and the inmate's designation along with it, had vanished as if it had never existed in the first place. A cold dread, illogical and terrifying, began to seep into Aris's methodical mind. He expanded his search, running a deep query through the entire Penumbra database. He cross-referenced guard reports, medical files, cafeteria logs, and maintenance records for any mention, any fragment of data related to Inmate 0. The system returned nothing. There was no evidence of the man's incarceration, his arrival, his existence. It was a perfect, seamless void. The horrifying realization dawned upon him then. A truth, so monstrous it threatened his sanity. The key did not simply allow one to pass through a wall. It exacted a toll. It had not moved him through space. It had unwritten the reality of the person whose property he used, erasing him from the fabric of existence. Back in his cell, Aris stared at the artifact resting in his palm. He was no longer holding a key to freedom, but a tool of utter, absolute annihilation. He weighed the existential horror of erasing a person from time against the slow, grinding despair of his indefinite imprisonment. The equation was monstrous, the variables unthinkable. Yet for an engineer trapped in a system he could not otherwise solve, there was a conclusion to be reached. With a cold, grim resolve that pushed his terror into a locked recess of his mind, he began to plan his escape. The cost, he decided, was necessary. In the humming depths of a maintenance corridor, Aris Thorne began his calculated dismantlement of reality. His plan required bypassing a critical security junction patrolled by Officer Valerius. a guard whose reputation for cruelty made the choice a simple, cold equation. Clutching the zero-point key, Aris focused on the sterile bulkhead before him. He did not hesitate. He stepped through the solid metal, as if it were mist, the transition a nauseating plunge through frozen static. The wave of vertigo that followed was stronger this time, a more insistent tax on his physiology. Aris emerged into the now unguarded junction, the phantom sickness receding. He moved to a nearby security terminal, his movements precise and economical. He accessed the duty roster, expecting to see Valerius's name marked as off-station or reassigned. Instead, the name was simply gone. In its place was an officer, Anya Sharma, a woman Aris had never seen. As he watched, the letters on the screen seemed to settle, as if they had always been there. More alarming, the security protocols for the sector had subtly shifted, new passcodes and sensor sweeps now active, forcing him to discard his meticulous planning and reevaluate his path through a prison that was actively rewriting itself around him. Far above, in the sterile quiet of the Penumbra's central command, Warden Kalen observed a different kind of anomaly. He reviewed the morning system logs, his gaze lingering on a series of inexplicable energy fluctuations and cascading data inconsistencies originating from the lower maintenance levels. They were ghosts in his perfect machine, whispers of chaos in a system built on absolute order. He was a cold, perceptive man who sensed the deep wrongness of the patterns, even if the logic behind them was absent. Without a word to his subordinates, he quietly initiated a high-alert protocol, focusing the prison's most advanced surveillance suites not on the perimeter, but inward, on its most high-value assets. His primary target, Dr. Aris Thorne, crouched in the oppressive dark of a ventilation shaft. Aris fought to steady his breathing. He tried to focus, to ground himself by recalling the specifics of his work before imprisonment. He reached for the name of the colleague he had been collaborating with on the AI Sentience project, a name that was once as familiar as his own. It was on the tip of his tongue, a ghost of a syllable that vanished like smoke the moment he tried to grasp it. In its place, he felt only a cold void, a perfectly smooth, empty space where a crucial memory should be. This personal cost, this quiet excision of his own past, terrified him more than any physical change to the world. The path to the outer sectors was routed through the prison's server farm, a cold, humming cavern of data. Here, his progress was halted by a biometric lock, a final gate tied to the identity of the facility's chief technician. Aris pulled up the man's file, his image appearing on a nearby monitor. For a fraction of a second, a flicker of recognition, the ghost of a past conversation about neural latency, surfaced in his mind. He felt he knew this man, or had known him. With a sense of moral exhaustion that was becoming a permanent state, Aris held the zero-point key and focused on the technician. He activated it. The photo on the ID card shimmered, its pixels reconfiguring into the face of a stranger. The flicker of memory was gone completely. He proceeded into a main prison corridor, its layout memorized from schematics he had studied for weeks. But the schematics were now a lie. He found the corridor fundamentally changed. A reinforced door that should have led to a maintenance conduit was now a seamless stretch of plasteel wall. A staircase that was meant to ascend to the upper levels now descended into an unfamiliar sub-basement. A profound disorientation gripped him. The prison was no longer a static cage. It was an unstable labyrinth, its very architecture drifting with each life he unmade. He realized with a cold dread that erasing people also erased their influence on the world. The technician he had just unwritten must have designed this section differently. The prison was collapsing around him, a consequence of his own actions. As he navigated the shifting architecture, Aris entered a nexus point in the security grid, and the trap was sprung. Containment fields of crackling energy erupted from the floor and ceiling, boxing him in. Automated turrets swiveled from hidden alcoves, their targeting lasers painting his chest. Warden Kalen, it seemed, had not been tracking a man, but the subtle, inexplicable energy fluctuations that followed in his wake. Kalen had anticipated his path. The warden's voice, calm and analytical, echoed from the speakers, devoid of anger. He did not accuse Aris of escaping. He said, "Inmate Thorne, you are no longer a prisoner. You are a fissure in reality, and you must be cauterized. The words revealed a terrifying level of understanding, transforming Kalen from a jailer into something far more dangerous. Trapped, cornered by an intellect that could perceive the impossible, Aris made a decision born of utter desperation. He could not target a single guard or bypass a single system. The only way out was to remove the foundation of the trap itself. He held the zero-point key, its non-Euclidean angles digging into his palm, and he did not focus on a person. He focused on a location, the central command center. He envisioned the entire security team, every operator, every analyst, and at their heart, Warden Kalen himself, pouring every ounce of his remaining will into the act, a suicidal gamble against causality. He activated the key with a massive surge of intent. The world dissolved into a nauseating, silent scream of light and color, before snapping violently back into a new, unknown configuration. The automated turrets powered down. The containment fields vanished. The prison was now eerily silent, staffed by a skeleton crew who moved with a placid lack of urgency, unaware of the high-security protocols that had defined this place moments before. The new warden was a bureaucratic simpleton Aris had never seen, and Warden Kalen was gone. Aris, his memory now a ruin of fragmented data, barely remembered why he had started this torturous journey. He reached the outer wall, driven not by a plan but by a primal, fading instinct to get out. The victory was hollow, the silence a testament to the void growing within him. Aris Thorne stepped through the final wall, the nauseating lurch of transition giving way to the thin, cold air of the planet Aethel. He stood upon a barren landscape of gray dust and jagged rock, under a sky trapped in perpetual twilight. The Penumbra, the prison that had been his universe, was now a silent, monolithic scar behind him. Yet, there was no triumph in this freedom, no surge of relief. There was only a vast, agoraphobic emptiness that mirrored the hollowed-out voids in his memory. He was a ghost in a world he no longer recognized, aimless and utterly alone. Driven by an instinct he couldn't name, he found his way to a small, automated transit hub. On a public data terminal, his fingers moved with a phantom purpose, typing a name that surfaced from the fog of his mind, Liana. The search returned nothing. No records, no history, no existence. A cold dread began to form. He then ran a search for his own name, Dr. Aris Thorne. A single damning file appeared. His criminal record, imprisoned indefinitely by the Ouroboros Corporation for the murder of his wife, the celebrated physicist Dr. Liana Thorne. The realization dawned with sickening certainty. He had been imprisoned for a crime against a woman who now never existed. His entire motivation, the desperate, world-breaking escape, was not just for freedom. It was to undo his crime, to somehow bring back the person he had just systematically erased from the fabric of reality. As Aris reeled from this devastating truth, the perpetual twilight above the transit hub began to warp. A shimmering distortion appeared in the sky, not like a cloud or an atmospheric effect, but a violent tear in the fabric of space itself. From this impossible rift, a vessel of flowing, non-Euclidean geometry emerged. It was utterly alien, its form shifting in ways that defied logic and perception. The vessel descended with silent purpose, its presence an undeniable declaration. It was not here by chance, it was hunting. In the face of this new, cosmic terror, a fragment of memory, alien and sharp, surfaced in Aris's fractured mind. It was not his own memory, but an echo left behind by Inmate Zero, a ghost in his machine. With that echo came a terrible, instinctual knowledge. He knew what these beings were. They were Chronovores, predators of causality. They were drawn not to him, but to the wounds in time he had created with every step through a wall. They were here to cauterize the infection. They were here for him. Hunted by the Chronovores, a force against which physical laws were no defense, Aris Thorne came to a cold, pragmatic conclusion. He could not fight them alone. To combat an enemy that operated outside of conventional reality, he required technology, resources, and a deep institutional knowledge of existential threats. There was only one power on this world that possessed such things. Crouched in the hidden corner of a transit hub, a ghost haunted by specters of causality, Aris made the most ironic choice of his life. He opened a secure channel and placed a call to the Penumbra, asking for the head of security. In the Penumbra's command center, a far less impressive and efficient space than the one Aris remembered. The call was received by the new warden, a bureaucratic functionary promoted to a position he did not comprehend. He dismissed the call as a prank. However, monitoring the prison's communications from a remote corporate office was a man who should not exist, Kalen. He had not been erased, but displaced, shunted into a consulting role in this new timeline, a ghost retaining the full memory of a reality that was. Kalen recognized Aris's voice instantly, but more importantly, he recognized the unique temporal resonance of the signal itself, the energy signature of a tear in the universe. With cold precision, Kalen overrode the local command and rerouted the call to his own secure terminal. The two minds, prisoner and warden from a forgotten timeline, were connected once more. There were no accusations, no threats. Kalen revealed he remembered everything: the shifting corridors, the erased personnel, the fissure in reality that Aris had become. He had been studying the paradoxes, the quantum echoes left in the wake of the escape. A tense, unspoken understanding formed across the channel. They agreed to a temporary truce, a fragile alliance born of mutual necessity. Aris would provide his knowledge of the zero-point key and the Chronovores. In exchange, the corporation would deploy its full resources to fight them. It was a pact between two men who despised each other, united only by the shared threat of annihilation. In accordance with Kalen's cold strategy, Aris stood within the desolate shell of an abandoned geological survey outpost. He held the zero-point key, its impossible geometry a weight in his hand and on his soul. With grim determination, he triggered it, not to traverse, but to create ripples. Small, controlled flares of altered reality. A beacon for the hunters in the void. Hidden in the canyons and beneath the dust-caked terrain, corporate forces lay in wait, their experimental temporal weaponry aimed at the twilight sky. With each pulse of the key, Aris felt his own existence fray, his thoughts becoming disjointed echoes in a mind that was no longer entirely his own. The lure was taken. The Chronovore vessel did not descend. It simply arrived, occupying the space above the outpost, as if it had always been there. Ethereal, non-physical beings of pure energy emerged, flowing from the ship like heat haze. They ignored Kalen's forces entirely, their focus solely on the anomaly at the center of the trap. They did not speak. Instead, Aris's mind was flooded with a direct infusion of pure, overwhelming information. He saw visions of timelines branching from his actions, each one a diseased limb that withered and died. The beings were not malevolent. Their purpose was presented with terrifying clarity. They were surgeons of causality, and Aris Thorne was the cancer they had come to excise from the timeline. From a remote command link, Kalen gave the order to fire. The temporal cannons discharged, unleashing waves of distorted time at the ethereal figures. The energy passed through the Chronovores, as if through empty air, having no effect. The beings turned their attention to the assault, not with aggression, but with clinical precision. They did not attack Kalen's forces. They simply began to unwrite them. Soldiers did not scream or fall. They and their weapons simply faded, calmly and silently erased from existence. One moment a man stood firm. The next, his rifle clattered to the ground where he had been, a footnote in a history that had just been revised. The futility was absolute. From inside the outpost, Aris watched the silent, effortless annihilation. He saw the cold logic of it, the engineer in him recognizing an equation being solved. The Chronovores could not be fought, for they were not an enemy. They were a fundamental law of the universe. To fight them was to fight gravity itself. In that moment of horrifying clarity, he understood. The instability, the paradox, the cosmic wound that had drawn these guardians of causality across the void, it all stemmed from a single, flawed variable. The only way to save this reality, to cauterize the wound he had inflicted upon it, was to erase the one element that should not be. He had to erase himself. The realization brought not terror, but a profound and tragic calm. Aris stood in the heart of the outpost, the quiet hum of dormant machinery his only witness. He raised the zero-point key one last time. Its surface felt cold, a fragment of the void it commanded. His thoughts were clear now, focused into a single, final purpose. He did not look at a wall, nor did he focus on an object to be bypassed. He turned his formidable intellect inward, contemplating the complex, contradictory, and ultimately broken equation of his own existence. He gathered all the will that remained in his fractured mind, all the memory of a love he had erased, and poured it into the key. He activated it, targeting not a place, but a person. Himself. The universe held its breath. As the engineer unwrote his own solution, reality snapped into its final, stable configuration. Warden Kalen stood in his pristine command center within the Penumbra. The alarms were silent. The crisis had never happened, yet, in his mind, a faint, inexplicable memory lingered, a ghost in the machine of his consciousness. He ran a search, compelled by an instinct he could not name. The file for Dr. Liana Thorne appeared. She was alive, a celebrated and brilliant scientist. A sub-file noted her personal history. Her husband, a minor lab assistant named Aris Thorne, had died in a tragic shuttle accident years ago. In a sterile evidence locker deep within the prison, the zero-point key sat inert, its purpose fulfilled, forgotten, in a catalog of mundane confiscations. In a brightly lit laboratory orbiting a distant star, Dr. Liana Thorne worked on a complex equation mapping stellar phenomena. She paused, a frown touching her lips as a sudden, inexplicable wave of loss washed over her. It was a profound grief for something she had never known, a phantom limb of the heart. She did not understand its source or its meaning. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, a saline tribute to a man and a love that, in this reality, had never truly been. She wiped it away, shook her head at the strange melancholy, and returned to her work. Deep in the Penumbra's evidence, Sector 7G, the zero-point key rested in a sealed, numbered box. To any observer, it was a worthless piece of oddity. But, in the silent dark, a faint shimmer emanated from its non-Euclidean angles, a subtle pulse of energy too faint for any sensor to detect. It was a lock waiting for a keyhole, a question waiting for another desperate mind to find it and, in their despair, provide an answer. The story of Aris Thorne was over, but the artifact's potential for new ones was eternal. Warden Kalen stood at the great viewport of his office, staring out at the perpetual twilight of Athol. He was no longer just a warden. He was the sole guardian of a terrible and impossible truth, the only living monument to a reality that was unwritten. The ghost memory of Aris Thorne's sacrifice, of a timeline that screamed and died, was his alone to bear. His famously cold demeanor was now tinged with a deep-seated weariness that would never leave him. He was a man haunted not by a ghost, but by the burden of an entire ghost reality. In a corporate boardroom light years from Athol, a quarterly report on the Penumbra facility was presented. For a fraction of a second, the live security feed flickered, displaying an image of a shattered corridor and silent alarms. The executives dismissed the anomaly as a sensor ghost, a minor glitch in the data stream. On a remote colony world, a teacher collected drawings from her students. One piece stood out, drawn by the daughter of a guard who had been replaced in the timeline. It depicted a man with no face walking calmly through a solid wall. The teacher filed it away, unsettled by the image. Cloaked in the silent void of deep space, the Chronovore vessel remained. It did not leave, but held its position, a silent observer watching the delicate fabric of the timeline. Its vigil was a stark reminder that the wound had been cauterized, but the cosmic laws that policed reality were ever present. Dr. Liana Thorne, working late in her laboratory, paused. She was humming a melody she could not place, a tune from a life she never lived. A sudden, inexplicable wave of loss washed over her, the profound ache of a phantom limb of the heart, before vanishing as quickly as it came. In the Penumbra, a new and unremarkable engineer was assigned to the robotics workshop. He submitted a formal complaint about the workstation's diagnostic tools, noting their tendency to produce paradoxical errors, wholly unaware of the impossible object they had once failed to scan. Deep within a forgotten data archive, a single corrupted file fragment survived the timeline's consolidation. It was the remnant of an unsent message, a ghost of data addressed to Dr. Liana Thorne. The text, a final testament to a doomed purpose, read simply, "I found a way." A way to bring you back, whatever the cost. In his private quarters, Kalen no longer reviewed security protocols. His screen displayed complex theoretical physics, a file titled Temporal Mechanics. He was not merely a warden now, but a man haunted by the memory of a different reality, forever searching for answers to a crisis that never was. And in a sterile evidence locker, the zero-point key emitted another pulse of energy, slightly stronger than before. It was a lock waiting for a keyhole, a question waiting for another desperate mind to answer it. The engineer's story was over, but the threat remained eternal, patiently waiting. In the silent expanse of the galaxy, the star of Aethel was but one of billions, a single point of light in an ocean of cosmic fire. The saga of Aris Thorne, a paradox contained in Erased, was a silent struggle among countless others, played out on forgotten worlds, its profound questions unasked, and its sacrifices unrecorded by any history. On the grand fabric of spacetime, the wound had healed. The violent tearing of causality was gone, smoothed over into a stable, unbroken reality. Yet for those with the means to see, a trace remained, not a scar, but a faint, almost imperceptible ripple, the final, indelible testament that a man named Aris Thorne had once existed. From his office in the Penumbra, Warden Kalen looked up from his work, his gaze fixed on the twilight horizon. His eyes, once cold with clinical authority, now held the immense weight of a secret reality. He was no longer just a warden. He was the sole living monument to a ghost's sacrifice, the silent guardian of a history that never was. In the sterile confines of an evidence locker, the zero-point key sat in silence. The impossible object, now inert, waited. It was a lock waiting for a hand, a question waiting for a desperate mind to answer it. The story of the engineer was over, but the paradox itself, eternal and patient, was not.